as an incompetent search, and they shared their criticism with Weldon's father and President Jones. Weldon, an engineer who was well known in his home state, used his influence to call in state police from New York and Connecticut. At the time, Vermont did not have its own state police force, and the search for Paula Weldon was unfortunately disorganized and lacking in resources. Vermont did have a state investigator by the name of Almo Franzoni, and within days of Paula's disappearance, he was put on the case. He, along with representatives from the New York and Connecticut police departments, took over the search. Those who had been volunteering to comb the Glastonbury wilderness for Paula switched their efforts to raising money for a reward. Collectively, they raised $5,000. Their efforts would be to no avail, however, as the days went by and there was still no trace of Paula. There were a number of tantalizing and unquestionably strange leads that kept investigators looking, such as the claim by a waitress in Fall River, Massachusetts, that she had served dinner to an agitated young woman at a table who matched Paula's description. This lead struck her father as so promising that he disappeared for 36 hours in order to follow it, without telling anyone of his whereabouts until he returned to Bennington. This led some to point to Weldon as the prime suspect in his daughter's disappearance, a theory made even more compelling by the facts surrounding the week before Paula's disappearance. Apparently, Paula was expected to go home to Kents and told them that she would be staying in Bennington. Apparently, according to Johnson, she and her father had had a falling out not long before her disappearance, and Johnson retracted her original statement that Paula was not distraught to say that, in fact, she had been quite depressed. Many speculated that Paula's depression was centered around a faraway boyfriend, and her father at one point posited a theory that his daughter had a boy from her hometown who wanted to call on her, and could have been a suspect. Mr. Weldon could never provide any evidence to substantiate his claim, however, though he claimed that a clairvoyant from Pownell insinuated a man's involvement in Paula's disappearance. On December 16, Paula's father packed up his daughter's belongings and returned to Connecticut, but not before lambasting Vermont for its lack of a professional police force. He deplored the alleged irresponsibility of those heading up the search, especially the fact that there had been no records kept of the first 10 days of the investigation. This was not overlooked by the small army of reporters from across New England who had descended on Bennington to cover the story, and the negative press the state received in the weeks following Paula's disappearance helped lead to the creation of the Vermont State Police in a legislative session in July 1947. As soon as Weldon left, the out-of-state reporters also bid Vermont adieu, although the Banner continued to cover the story as front-page news until late December. Volunteer search parties would continue to make expeditions on the long trail, but by early January harsh weather conditions and lack of hope ended their efforts. Any evidence of Paula Weldon, if it ever existed, was buried under snow and the passage of time. Or was it? In 1955, a lumberjack who had been in Bickford Hollow near the Long Trail where Paula had disappeared said he had followed a girl fitting Paula's description into the woods. More importantly, he told a friend that he knew where Paula's body was buried. After interest in Paula's case had been revived and the man had been extensively questioned by then village attorney Reuben Levin, the man admitted that he'd been joking and had no knowledge of Paula or her whereabouts. The case remained unsolved and was nearly declared cold until, 13 years later, an unidentified skeleton was found in Adams. Investigators excitedly awaited the results of an analysis on the bones, only to find that they were too old to have possibly been Paula's. Closure once again proved elusive for the Weldons and investigators of the case. After the Adams skeleton, no significant leads were ever uncovered, leading people to formulate their own theories as to what became of the girl. Speculations have been widely varied, from the more practical, she ran off with a boyfriend, she died of exposure in the wilderness, to the paranormal. The most intriguing of theories in the latter category is one that is raised by New England author and occult researcher Joseph Citro. He coined the term, the Bennington Triangle, to describe an area of southwestern Vermont within which 5 people disappeared between 1945 and 1950, including Paula. He links these disappearances to a special energy that inhabits the Glastonbury wilderness area that attracts visitors from outer space, who most likely snatched up Paula and the subsequent missing persons. For his part, current director of the Vermont State Police, James W. Baker, has no particular theory on Paula's disappearance, saying that, "Since I wasn't directly involved, I can't speculate on the case." However, one thing he can say definitively is that the Vermont State Police came into existence because of Paula, and since their inception in 1947 they have been responsible, by statute, for all wilderness search and rescue missions. Noting that states like Maine and New Hampshire have wildlife agencies do wilderness rescues, Baker said that Vermont State Police's mandated responsibility to coordinate wilderness search and rescue efforts comes directly out of the Paula Weldon case. He also said that just 2 weeks ago he was talking with the head of the State Police Search and Rescue Committee and she had expressed interest in researching the case, to put, as Baker put it, a new set of eyes on the case. So is the case of Paula Weldon cold? Technically, yes, says Baker, but it still remains open, should any leads come up. Whether or not any new information emerges, it is unlikely that anyone familiar with Bennington history will be able to head up the long trail and not think of Paula Weldon's ill-fated journey 60 years ago. Vital statistics at time of disappearance: missing since December 1, 1946 from Bennington, Vermont. Classification: endangered. Missing date of birth: October 19, 1928. Age: 18 years old. Height and weight: 5'5", 122 pounds. Distinguishing characteristics: Caucasian female. Blonde hair, blue eyes. Weldon has a grayish-colored scar on her left knee, a small scar under her left eyebrow, and a vaccination scar on her right thigh. She has a cleft chin and an upturned nose. Clothing, jewelry. Description: a red parka with a fur-trimmed hood, blue jeans, size 6.5 or 7 white top-sider sneakers with heavy soles, and a small gold Ladies Elgin wristwatch with a narrow black band. The watch has the repairer's marking, 13050 HD, scratched on the inside of the back case. Details of disappearance: Weldon was a sophomore at Bennington College in Bennington, Vermont at the time of her disappearance. She was last seen on December 1, 1946. She worked the breakfast and lunch shifts at the dining hall, came back to her dormitory room in Dewey Hall and spoke to her roommate for a while before saying she was going to take a study break and go for a hike. She didn't say where she was headed. Weldon left campus shortly after 2:30 p.m. She was probably carrying little or no money at the time, and she left behind an uncashed check her parents had sent her for her living expenses. She was also underdressed for the cold weather. A passing motorist picked up Weldon, who was hitchhiking, near the Bennington campus at 2:45 p.m. She told him she was going to hike on the long trail off Route 9, near Glastonbury Mountain. The driver dropped her off on Route 9 3 miles from the trail. Several others saw her at that day walking on the trail. The last when she spoke to a man on the trail and asked her how far it extended. He told her it went all the way to Canada. The sun set at about 5 p.m. and it began snowing a few hours after that, accumulating 3 inches. Weldon has never been heard from again. Her roommate became concerned the next morning when she realized she'd never returned home the previous night. Later that morning, she notified the school authorities of Weldon's disappearance. At the time, Bennington students were required to sign themselves out if they planned to stay out past 11 p.m., then check in with the school security officer upon their return. Weldon had done neither of those things. When she failed to attend her classes the following Monday, Bennington College officials notified her family and the police. An extensive search of the long trail and its environs turned up no sign of Weldon and no significant clues. The search was hampered by the fact that Vermont had no state police at the time. Eventually, officials from Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York stepped in to help. Investigators initially believed Weldon had gotten lost in the mountains and died of exposure, but as time passed without their finding any sign of her, they began to consider other theories. Authorities looked into Weldon's background to see if she might have left of her own accord. She was a good student, majoring in art, but she had lately become less interested in the subject. She found herself drawn to music and botany instead and may have been thinking of changing her major. Although there were reports that she was somewhat depressed at the time of her disappearance, her family and friends said she only had normal problems for a girl her age and was not unhappy enough to commit suicide or run away from home. She had never had a steady boyfriend. She left all her belongings behind, and her family stated she was not the type of person to leave without warning. There is also no hard evidence of foul play in Weldon's disappearance, although many believe she was murdered and buried somewhere in near the Long Trail. Weldon lived with her parents and 3 younger sisters in Stamford, Connecticut when she was not in school. She enjoyed painting in oils and watercolors, pencil and charcoal sketching, and playing the guitar, and she was physically active and an experienced hiker and camper. In part because of her father's lobbying after her disappearance, in July 1947 Vermont passed a law creating a state police force. Weldon's disappearance remains unsolved. There has been no sign of her since 1946. Missing people in the Bennington Triangle, 1945 Mitty Rivers was serving as a mountain guide in the area on November 12, 1945. When he was guiding his group back to their camp, he got ahead of the bunch and was never seen again. The event happened near the Long Trail Road, an area that 75-year-old Mitty was presumably familiar with. Police and volunteers searched for the man, but no clue to his fate was ever found. 1946 Paula Weldon, a college student, went hiking on the Long Trail one day. She was never seen again and no trace of her has ever been found. 1949 3 hunters went missing in the area around 1949, but there is little evidence to back up the claims. 1949 James E. Tefford got on a bus in St. Albans. By the time the bus reached Bennington, he was gone and never to be seen again. There is no evidence that supports that he actually went missing in the Bennington Triangle area. 1950 On October 12, Paul Jepson, an 8-year-old, went missing. His scent was followed by dogs, but it was lost on a highway. 1950 Frida Lander disappeared on October 28, 1950 when she was hiking with her cousin. Frida had separated with her cousin to head back to camp to change after getting her clothes wet, but she never returned to the camp. A massive search was mounted by police, volunteers, firemen and military sought the woman, but nothing turned up until the following May. Her body was found in a field that had been searched extensively in the previous months.
Now for another triangle of weirdness, the Bridgewater Triangle. Although not an official vile vortex, the inland Bridgewater Triangle is likely one of the world's most concentrated areas of diverse paranormal reports. Located just 30 miles south of Boston, this 200-mile square area has the Massachusetts towns of Abington, Freetown and Rehoboth at its angles. The town of Bridgewater is located nearly dead center within the triangle, and the area also encompasses 6 other Massachusetts towns: Raynham, Taunton, Brockton, Mansfield, Norton and Easton. Mysterious landmarks. The Hockomock Swamp. The Hockomock Swamp, a 5,000-plus acre area, lies within the western section of Bridgewater Triangle and is the hub of many paranormal reports. Also the site of an 8,000-year-old Native American burial ground. When archaeologists opened the graves of Grassy Island, the red ochre within the tombs bubbled and then mysteriously disappeared. Photographs taken of the excavation would not develop one. The swamp remains shrouded in superstition. Called